What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I am happy to bring you a review of a speaker that until recently I didn't even know existed. It's the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5. And the way I found out about this speaker is I was on the phone with a friend and we were talking about products that we felt were hidden gems. And he was like, bro, have you heard of the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5s? To which I responded, I didn't even know Pro-Ject made speakers. Now, I knew about their turntables, their streamers, their DACs, their integrated amps and all that stuff that they make, but I did not know they made speakers. So I hopped online and I checked them out. They looked good and they were fairly inexpensive at just $349. So I bought a pair. Here we go. So we'll do this review the same way we generally do, where I'll tell you about some specs and standout features. I'll throw the main ones on screen. I'll tell you about what the speaker sounds like. Maybe I'll give you some amplifier recommendations, some subwoofer pairing advice, some comparisons to other stuff around this price range, and then we'll wrap it up. So specs and standout features. Standout features, in my opinion, are going to be, first and foremost, guys, at $349, you would expect a vinyl finish, and you would not be surprised to see a vinyl finish, but one is not available. These only come in gloss painted finishes. Thank you, Pro-Ject. Oh my God, you guys know I hate vinyl. Now, for speakers that are under $1,000, I'm not surprised to see vinyl. I expected. It's a budget speaker usually. But to see standard paint at $349, no upcharge, 3 color options, gloss white, gloss black, gloss red. This took me by surprise. When I bought them, I didn't know it was a standard painted finish. I found out as I was taking them out of the box, and this was what I consider a happy surprise. Now, another standout feature is going to be the size. They're fairly small, so if you want to throw them on something like a desktop, they should be perfectly sized for that, but don't worry, they can fill a room shockingly well. And this is something that took me by surprise, because generally smaller speakers like this is about the same size as the Psb P3, and that speaker really struggled to sound good in my room, which is not that large. My room is about 12 by 14 with 9-foot ceilings. This speaker filled my room just fine. Now, did it sound as full and as large as something more normal size like a Focal Aria 906 that's $2,000 for the pair? Of course not. But did it struggle to fill my room with sound at fairly loud volumes? Absolutely not. Some other standout features are going to be just the price, in my opinion. At $349, it's fairly inexpensive. I believe most people can afford these. They're fairly accessible. And even if you're a college student and you don't have a whole lot of money, you could save over a couple of months and easily buy these, in my opinion. So I love to see that. The overall aesthetics are something I like quite a bit. Some people would say, hey, it's just a speaker at the end of the day. It's a couple of drivers in a box. You guys know who I'm talking about. Sean from Zero Fidelity says that. But I think these are so good looking. And let's be honest, most of that's going to be because of the painted finish. I'm just a sucker for it. I'm here for it. I love it. I love to see it. I want to see more of it. So let's see. Let's talk about amp pairing real quick. I found these speakers to be very matter of fact. What you put in is what you're going to get out, meaning if you connect these to an amp that's going to be a little bit rolled off, a little bit warmer sounding, that's what you're going to get. If you connect these to a more affordable Class D amp that's going to be a little bit more analytical, more cool, and things like that, that's what you're going to get. So super matter of fact, they're not going to color the sound a whole lot. You're just getting in what your amp's going to do, or if you've got a DAC upstream that's going to color the sound, and so on. So that's great in my opinion. Now, is it time to talk about the listening impressions? Let me tell you about an amp recommendation real quick. So at $349, we're in the budget category, so there's no need to talk about amplifiers like over $1,000, right? But in my opinion, one of the best pairings for a speaker like this is going to be something very inexpensive, actually, like the Yamaha Rs202. That's a stereo amp that's only about $169, and I think that amp paired with these speakers is going to be a fantastic sound. The Yamaha Rs202 is a little bit muscular in the bass region, it's a little bit warm in the mid-range, and just the slightest bit rolled off on the treble, and I think that would be such a good pairing for these speakers. I don't have one here for review anymore, so I couldn't test it, but I'm intimately familiar with that amplifier. One of my best friends owns one. I hear it all the time when I'm at his house. Anyhow. You could, of course, upgrade to something more expensive if you have more budget, like the Iota VX SA3. I think that would be a great pairing, or the Emotiva TA1. That's another fantastic amp. I actually have that here for review, and we'll talk about that in a future video. Very good amp, by the way. Subwoofers. This is a small speaker, so in my opinion, subwoofers is going to be a great thing to add. It's going to give you a lot more fullness, more extension, and all those good things. The subwoofer I used for most of my listening impressions were the Rel T0. I've got that in gloss white, so together they just looked really, really good. and I found the overall sound to be very, very enjoyable. Of course, most of my listening impressions will be without a subwoofer, just in case some of you guys are planning to not add a subwoofer. And to those of you that are planning to not add a subwoofer, I hope you change your mind, because subwoofers are awesome. Anyhow, what the hell does it sound like? So, starting with the top end, we're gonna have treble that is gonna be a little bit extended, a little bit on the forward side of neutral. It's gonna project into the room in a forward manner. It's never gonna be too harsh or aggressive or rip your ears off at all. I listen to music for about 2 hours at a time or longer. If a speaker is too bright, usually my listening sessions go down to about as low as 30 minutes. That never happened with these. I was able to listen to the full 2 hours plus. We've got a ton of air, a ton of separation, nice decay, big open sound, and the top end was just generally what I would consider very enjoyable, especially at this price point. Moving down to the mid-range is where I was really, really taken by surprise. You know, in the mid-range, what most people love is vocal presentation and vocal performance. The human voice elicits an emotional response in me, for music at least, right? When I hear especially female vocals and they project in the room in that awesome way, I get like tingles, you know what I mean? I actually recently read online that doesn't happen to everyone. Not everyone has an emotional reaction to music, but that's a whole other story. So, the female vocals. Let me be clear, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this, but the vocal presentation for female vocals for this speaker was about on par with what I would expect from speakers costing about $1,000 a pair. That's a hell of a compliment. I don't normally say stuff like that. Normally stuff doesn't punch too much above its weight, and I'm not saying the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 are worth $1,000 or they're as good as speakers that are $1,000 or better. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is for the vocal performance, for female vocals, they absolutely compete with speakers costing about $1,000. Absolutely. The female vocal performance was so awesome. The scale was very large. It projected forward into the room. It had air and space around it. It was so clear. The separation was outstanding. It was the most enjoyable characteristic of this speaker, and not just like good for the money. It was just good. It was so, so good. It was one of those scenarios, and this doesn't happen to me too often because I'm not jaded, but I am spoiled, right? My standard equipment, like my sound system as it sits, when I have it set up the way I listen to it, we're at about $15,000, maybe $13,000. It just depends what subwoofer I have connected, but over 10 grand, right? That's a lot of money to spend on a sound system. I am spoiled. Generally, stuff that's under 500 bucks doesn't really impress me. I can listen to it and go, oh yeah, it sounds good. It's good for the money, it compares well, a lot of people are gonna like it, but rarely am I like, whoa, that was amazing. And I did have that experience with this speaker for the vocal mid-range performance. Now, the mid-range overall is also quite good. I would say it's very neutral. It's not recessed, it's not a V-curve. Thank God for that, I don't like V-curve. It's not like boosted in any way either. It's fairly neutral, but being a very small speaker, it's not gonna have a ton of bass. So male vocals, on the other hand, they're not gonna be the most lifelike. They're not gonna have the truest sense of scale, and you can't expect that. Not just from this speaker, from any speaker this size, you can't expect that. Speakers, I mean, guys, I think it's only like 8 inches tall, maybe 9 inches tall. I'll leave the measurements. Anyway, male vocals still quite good, don't get me wrong. It's just not gonna sound like it would on a much larger speaker, something more normal size like a Focal Aria 906, right? So far we got 2 wins. Treble was good, mid-range was good. Female vocal performance was out of this world, especially for this price category. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Best I've heard in this price category. That female vocal presentation, that was the best I've heard in this price category. I haven't heard better. That's how good it was. Let's move down to the bass. So the bass overall, not a whole lot of it. It's a tiny speaker. We can't expect a whole lot, but it wasn't entirely absent either. It really kind of depended on the song. Some songs sounded fuller than others. And I did use a subwoofer half the time. There's no mid-bass bump, which I greatly appreciate. I feel like a mid-bass bump generally makes a speaker sound cheap or kind of like boomy or bloated. It usually happens when speaker companies try to get too much bass out of a tiny speaker and they kind of like abuse the driver. It's it leads to just a sloppy sound, and I don't like that, because when you have a speaker, you know, let's say Pro-Ject took this speaker and they're like, let's give it more bass, make that driver work harder. It'll give you more bass, but then it's going to be sloppy. The problem with that is when you try to add a subwoofer to it, you're just going to have more sloppy bass. I'd rather have less bass that's cleaner, well composed, a little bit tighter, a little bit more articulate. That way, when I add a subwoofer like something like the REL T0 Mark III, we got a nice, clean bass presentation. And that's what I was able to accomplish when I used the REL T0. I also used the REL T7X. That was a great match. I really enjoyed that. And I tried a few other subwoofers I have here, like the KEF KF92. That was obviously a little bit overkill. That's a $2,000 subwoofer. But yeah, look, overall, from top to bottom, the presentation on the speaker, it's going to be pretty good. Now, if you like a very warm presentation, you're almost never going to get that from a small speaker, because small speakers are not going to have enough bass to give that thick, juicy sound. You might get warmth from the mid-range up, meaning, you know, like rolled off treble and kind of more of that lusciousness in the mid-range, but it's still generally a bit unlikely, because you do need a little bit more bass in that mid-range region to get that super warm sounding speaker. Again, these are pretty matter of fact. You're going to get out what you put in. It's mostly going to be based on your upstream equipment. My gear is mostly neutral sounding, so that's pretty much what I got out of these. Now, comparisons. Let's talk about this versus the Emotiva B1 Plus. That is one of my favorite speakers at $300 and below. I own a pair. I'm intimately familiar with them. I've owned them for a very long time, and I have recommended the hell out of them left and right. This speaker is about $50 more. Is it worth $50 more? First of all, it totally is worth $50 more alone for the standard painted finish. Aside from that, which one should you get? Let me explain, because the sound signature of the two speakers, very, very different. Now, the top end of the Pro-Ject Speaker Box, well, you know, let's start with the Emotiva. The Emotiva uses an AMT tweeter. So the top end of the Emotiva B1 Plus versus the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5, as far as how extended they are, the amount of treble energy, the imaging, the soundstage width, height, all that, about equal, pretty good. But the way it's presented in the Emotiva B1 Plus is very, very different. That AMT tweeter has a softer presentation. Its attack is softer. Thomas in Stereo used to talk about this in some of his older videos. He would say the edge is a little bit rounded, not rolled off. He's not talking about the frequency response being rolled off. He's talking about that initial attack of that cymbal hit or whatever other instrument makes those high frequency noises. It's not sharp, it's smoother or rounded, the edge. I like to just say the attack is soft. So the Emotiva B1 Plus, great extension, great detail, but the presentation, smooth, softer with the attack. Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5, sharper with the attack, better defined leading edges, and so on. Moving down to the mid-range, both have a good mid-range, but again, wildly different. Emotiva B1 Plus has got a slight V-curve, so we've got a little bit of a dip in the mid-range, but it's a little bit more of a bass-heavy speaker, so male vocals are going to sound a little bit better. The Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 having a little bit less bass isn't going to have that edge in the male vocal region, but the female vocal region, since it's not a V-curve, is going to sound not just a little bit better, a lot better. Amazing, in fact. Hell, I said it earlier, best I've heard at this price point. So if you dig a V-curve and kind of like a softer treble presentation, you might like the Emotiva B1 Plus. If you like a more neutral mid-range and a treble presentation that is more sharp rather than soft or smooth, you may like the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5. Moving down to the bass, the Emotiva B1 Plus is a larger speaker. Well, at least its cabinet is much larger. So the Emotiva B1 Plus is going to take the edge with respect to overall bass output. So that wraps up the comparison for the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 and the Emotiva B1 Plus. Let's talk about the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 against another affordable small speaker, the Psb P3. Here again, we have a very different presentation. And I know earlier I said there's not a lot of small speakers that have a warm-ish tone to them, but the Psb P3 is one of them. So let's talk about that. The Psb P3, I don't know how much it costs anymore. It's been a while since I reviewed it. It's under $300 though. It's got a 4-inch driver, right? So it is a little bit smaller, but let's start with the top end. The treble is going to be very different on these two speakers. The Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 is a very easy to drive speaker, whereas the Psb P3 is a very difficult to drive speaker. I prefer the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 for that reason alone, because the very difficult to drive Psb P3 never felt like it had dynamics. It never felt like it had scale. It always felt like it was like, just give me more power and I will not give you much sound in return. Whereas the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 with just a little bit of power, they freaking sing. And guys, I've got tons of power on tap. I use monoblock power amps, and the Psb P3 was still hard to drive for me. Anyhow, I digress. The Psb P3, I would say, is a little bit more closed off sounding in the top end compared to the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5. The Pro-Ject is going to be more open, more airy, more extended. Moving down to the mid-range of the Psb P3 is going to sound a little bit muffled by direct comparison to the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5. So overall, Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 is going to take the win in terms of mid-range and treble. Moving down to the bass, despite having a 4-inch driver, the Psb P3 has a boosted bass response, so it is going to have more bass quantity. But again, when you boost a speaker's bass quantity, it's not going to be the tightest bass, it's not going to be the most articulate or most refined bass, but it is, as we say, a fun sound. Anyhow, I personally would take the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 over the Psb P3 any day of the week. So that almost wraps it up. Let's talk about the KEF Q150 real quick, and then we'll really be done. The KEF Q150 is a $600 speaker that goes on sale occasionally between $300 and $349. It is quite a bit larger, so you can expect a little bit more bass out of that speaker. And like the Psb P3, its bass is boosted. So again, while it offers up a lot more bass, it's not going to be the most controlled, refined, tightest, etc. So starting with the top end, both speakers have a great top end. I would give the slight edge to the KEF Q150 in my opinion. KEF does something really magical with their treble region. There's this separation that seems to just be awesome, and I think it's exclusive to the Uni-Q driver. But the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 is going to throw a larger soundstage with respect to its vertical presentation. The KEF Q150, its width is pretty good, but its soundstage is kind of short. It's this odd thing. Not a lot of people notice it, but those that do know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's ironic, well, it's not ironic, but it's interesting because the KEF LS50 Meta does it also. So I think it has to do with the Uni-Q driver. Anyhow, both have a great top end. They're close enough that it's not worth talking about too much more. Both have a decent mid-range, but I do believe the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 is going to take the edge with that more clarity in that mid-range region, that more openness, that larger sense of scale. Moving down to the bass, as I've said, the KEF Q150 has a larger cabinet. It's going to have larger, fuller sounding bass, although it is boosted, so it's not going to be the most controlled or tightest. So, in conclusion, what are you getting for $349? Is it worth it? Absolutely, it's worth it. Should you buy it? Well, that's really up to you. If you're looking for a compact speaker that's going to have killer imaging, amazing female vocal performance, and you're probably going to add a subwoofer at some point, and you want a good-looking speaker, this is probably about as good as you could do. It really is. I love the Emotiva B1 Plus a lot. I'm going to continue to recommend the hell out of that, but this is going to be something I'm going to recommend right alongside it going forward because the two are, in my opinion, the leaders of this price category, and they're so wildly different with respect to their sound presentation that I feel it'll be very easy for me to recommend both of them. Like, hey, you want a bit of a V-curve? Go with the Emotiva B1 Plus. You want something that's a little bit more linear with its response? Go with the Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5. Both are fantastic, but big hats off to Pro-Ject again for giving us that gloss painted finish that really puts a damn smile on my face. So, with that said, I don't have much else to say in this video. I enjoyed my time with these. I actually own them, so I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with them now. Might go upstairs on top of my media console. We'll see. Anyhow, if you have any questions, ask about them in the comments below. Until next time, later.